From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. What does true midwifery look like? How does a midwife usher in life and support the birth experience? And what do birth and death have in common? This is episode 419, and our guest today is a midwife who was traditionally trained and licensed through a medical board, but who now sees the birthing experience through a new paradigm. And it is a process that she now supports in homes. She is part of the remembering of how to reconnect with our deep knowing, understanding that our bodies know exactly what to do during the birthing process and at other times. Our guest today tells stories of lives she's welcomed into the world and those she's seen depart. She describes the honor of womb-to-tomb care and what we've lost since as a society we've moved away from these ancient traditions. Our guest is Lindsey Meehleis, midwife, storyteller, mother, and rememberer of great-grandmother wisdom. Before we dive into the conversation, we'd love for you to join our WAPF email list. Let's have a direct line of communication. On our list, you'll be able to stay abreast of action alerts in your area, along with important topics of interest, like food freedom, upcoming events, and more. Go to westonaprice.org and click on the yellow button on our homepage to sign up. I'll put a link in the show description to make it easy for you to join us and get just what you need. And a shout out to our sponsors, Earth Runners. Free your feet and rewild your soul. Earth Runners wants to restore our relationship with nature and to help us rediscover our ancestral roots via minimalist earthing sandals. It's obvious that we need to incorporate more simple, nature-based lifestyle practices and outsource less of our life to modern technology. Our ancestors were virtually always grounded. Honestly, it's only since the advent of modern insulating soles that we have lost this connection to the earth. Earth Runner's minimalist sandals feature a copper earthing plug and conductive laces to keep us grounded to the earth for a more barefoot-like experience. So free your feet and rewild your soul with Earth Runner's sandals. Visit earthrunners.com and use the code WISE23 for 10% off at checkout. That's earthrunners.com and the code WISE23. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Lindsey.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So you came to our attention because you were featured in a movie by Heart and Soil Films. And in particular, I'm remembering the segment where there were two placentas, one that looked vibrantly healthy, a deep red burgundy color, and the other one that looked floppy and flaccid. Can you describe to us why these placentas look so different?
Yeah, so I first want to start by saying that this is just two placentas. This is not a huge study with lots of different placentas. And when anybody says that there's an extreme one way or another, everything becomes very dogmatic. And that's not where I ever like to start my practice, start any conversation. I like to be welcoming of all different people. I love to sit down with people, have conversations about what they're doing on a daily basis. So this film made a very big, broad statement, but that's because that's what happens when you edit things down. So we recorded that day for like 6 hours, and that segment was like 30 seconds. And so that's where I want to start this conversation in saying that, like, not every single vegetarian or vegan is going to have a placenta that looks like that. Do I believe that there's vegetarians and vegans that can have healthy pregnancies? Of course I do. But in this case, in this scenario with these two different placentas, there was two different clients that I had within my practice who just so happened to give birth right around the time of filming this. One of them was a mom that was very much based in a Weston A. Price diet. So she consumed very nutrient-dense nutrition throughout her whole entire pregnancy. She consumed a lot of meat. Was she full carnivore? No, of course not. She incorporated in a lot of raw dairy. She was doing cod liver oil. And the other mom started the pregnancy vegetarian. It was her third pregnancy, so she was a little bit depleted going into it. And by the time that we reached her second trimester, she was definitely very anemic. So at that point, she started to add in liver capsules. So she wasn't even a full vegetarian. And these two placentas, when they came out, you could see a drastic difference between the two. Like you described, one was very vibrant and the other one looked very white and floppy, so to speak. That placenta was also pretty hard to come out. I love letting placentas birth on their own. I don't ever have that third stage management of labor. Third stage is the delivery of the placenta, the birth of the placenta. And that one just took a little bit longer to come out. So it's caused a lot of buzz. There's like a lot of like different groups of people that are like varying on like in agreement with this or in agreement with that. But I really want us to take a step back and remember that like we're all in this together. There's no division in the statement that was made. And if we enter into this just by looking and saying like, hey, like this mom was way more nourished during her pregnancy, this was more optimal for this baby, then we could just take all of that dogma out and realize that in the end, all of us want the same thing, which is a healthy mom and a healthy baby.
Absolutely. Now, someone did bring to my attention, they said something about, hey, all of this discussion is moot because the placenta is formed primarily from the father's DNA. Is that correct, Lindsey?
So the study that is probably referencing is a study that was done in 2013 through Cornell University. And what that did was it looked at donkeys and horses and the crossbreeding between the two. And what they found is on the fetal side of the placenta, that the paternal DNA made up a lot of the fetal side of the placenta. So there's two sides of the placenta. So there's the fetal side that's attached to the baby where the umbilical cord inserts and the bags of water are attached. And then there's the maternal side. So on the maternal side, there's these cotyledons, which are spongy-like tissue that actually adheres to the uterine wall. If the mom has, let's say, a negative blood type and the baby has a positive blood type, this blood should not exchange between the two. So the fetal side of the placenta is not even what was shown on that video that was recorded with Heart and Soil. It was the maternal cotyledon side. So, and there's really not a lot of research on that with that statement saying that the father's DNA creates the placenta. It was one study that was done in Cornell in 2013. So I would love if anybody has more information on that, but it's just not something that's been really looked at. So what my response to that would be is that, yeah, great. Fetal side of the placenta usually always looks great. Like it's very rare that I have a placenta that doesn't look good on the fetal side unless the baby's had meconium, which is their first poop, and the fetal side is stained from the meconium, which is still healthy, but it just looks a little bit different. But that maternal side is definitely from mom's nutrition, mom's backup, so to speak, of all of those minerals that she's accumulated over time, over her lifetime, and over her mother's lifetime and her grandmother's lifetime as well.
That is mind-blowing. And speaking of mind-blowing, as a midwife, you have had the privilege of observing and ushering into the world these fresh little lives. Tell us a story of a recent birth that you witnessed and facilitated.
Yeah. So anytime that I start talking about birth, I realize it's a very charged subject. So I always like to start with taking a deep breath, a collective breath together. I always like all of the people that are listening to this podcast to really slow down the resonance. You're listening to this podcast right now for a reason. You found it for whatever reason, and it's in your psyche right now because these are different stories and stuff that you get to hear and navigate through. And sometimes you might have a little charge around it. So if you're driving, please don't close your eyes. I just want both of us right here and everybody listening just to take a deep breath in through our nose, down into our lungs, down into our bellies, down into our wombs if you have one, letting your shoulders drop, letting any tension around your mouth just release your jaw. And as you exhale, letting everything go even more. And I just want you to imagine that every person that's listening to this right now is connected to you through our breath. Remembering that as we breathe in unison, that the most important thing is that we're in this together. Coming back to the space. And so I'm just going to start with a birth story. So anytime that I talk about birth, I equally find that talking about death is just as important because the most guaranteed part of life is death. That's the number one thing that we know coming into this space is that that's guaranteed. So I had a beautiful birth this month of twins to a boy and a girl. This was a repeat client. So they had worked with me for 2 previous pregnancies. And in the second pregnancy, we were like peak. It was January 2021. And the mom called me at 33 weeks pregnant and said, Linz, I'm not feeling the baby move. And in those situations, you're like, oh, okay, like drink some juice. And usually everything's fine, but nothing was changing. And so I rushed over to her house and there was no heartbeat. And so we navigated that birth that was, a death together. And it was beautiful and heartbreaking and tragic and sacred all at the same time. And this little baby girl who was 3 pounds was born in the middle of the night as we tucked ourselves back into a tiny little bedroom. And she squat right in front of me. My partner, Ashley, was behind her. Her husband was right next to me. And this gorgeous little girl that didn't breathe was born into our hands. That's everybody's biggest fear, right? Like nobody ever wants to have to experience anything like that. And so we navigated through the grief of that together. We made the whole process very reverent. Their 3-year-old daughter came out and held her sister that would never take a breath. It was definitely a couple of months of letting the mom have that time to grieve before she could even think about getting pregnant again. So she called me, said she was pregnant again. Probably 9 months later. She came into the office. I have a little tiny handheld ultrasound machine. And she said, I really would like to look at the baby. So we looked at the baby. And instead of it being a baby, it was 2 babies. And so the entire office, I share a room with a pediatric and prenatal chiropractor. And so the office is always buzzing here. And the entire office just erupted in laughter. And there was so much joy that was brought in with seeing 2 of these babies. And so she continued through the pregnancy so healthy. She took such good care of herself. I mean, it was like her full-time job to make sure that she was getting enough protein and hydrating well and taking good care of herself spiritually and mentally. And she was 1 day before her due date. And she went to the office. That her and her husband are tattoo artists. So they went, actually I should call it a studio. They went to their studio and she texted me that morning and said, these babies still aren't here yet. And I said, I'm actually down the street from you at another birth. And if anything changes, let me know. And so she went to the studio, came home at 2 p.m. And as she was getting into the car from the studio, she started feeling cramping. And I had already finished the birth that I was at down the street from her. I was driving home. She texted me, I think I might be in labor. And I said, I'm on my way home. I'm going to go shower. I was going to sauna really quick. Keep me posted. With those calls, typically what happens is that it takes a few hours, so to speak. Like, I'll see you later tonight. And I was in the sauna for 10 minutes. I literally had just broken my first little bead of sweat. And she texted me and said, contractions are every 2 to 3 minutes. So I went, oh no. And I jumped out of the sauna, jumped in the shower really quick. And she kept on like reassuring me, like, it's not going to happen quick. Like, take your time. And I just knew that I had to rush back up there. So I rushed up the freeway. I called all my team. In the state of California, we need to have an OBGYN for all of our twin or breech birth. I called my collaborative OB, Dr. Victoria Flores. She started gathering everything. We all got there and I walked into this room. And the last time I had walked into this room for a birth was for a totally different energy. So I really got to step into this space and take a deep breath and make this container that we were in, everybody that was in the room, this really sacred container where we really got to sit in deep reverence of being able to witness this rebirth that was happening within this mom. And I looked at her and she said, I think I need to push. Is it too soon? And I said, no, listen to your body. Of course not. She never had a vaginal exam and she just started pushing. And within about 15 minutes, baby boy, who was supposed to come second, came out first. And we put baby up on her chest. And then 22 minutes later, baby girl came out. And her daughter, who was 5, sat on my lap with the birth of baby girl. And she watched the whole thing. And she said she wanted to catch, but then she whispered in my ear that she didn't want to. And in that moment when the girl was born, it was not that anything would ever make us forget their daughter that was born asleep, but it just brought so much joy to us. And it really made us feel this full circle of life. And the fact that her brother had come first and kind of paved the way for her to come. And it was just absolutely beautiful. So that's just a little snip of a birth that, I get to experience on a very regular basis.
And Lindsey, I sense in you as you're telling that story, kind of this reverence and this understanding that something beyond the physical is taking place during these births. When did your eyes kind of open to that reality?
My story started with my daughter's birth. I had a very medicalized birth. I was induced. I had every intervention that there is, and I ended up with a C-section. I was young. I was 21 when I had her. And I left that experience with this deep knowing that something that I was supposed to experience wasn't experienced. I missed out on a profound rite of passage. And when that happened to me, even being 21 years old, I was like, there has to be a different way to do this. And that's when I really jumped into the childbirth world and became a childbirth educator and a doula, and eventually ended up becoming a midwife. And as I witnessed each birth, I noticed this energy that just encompassed the room. Even if it was a cold, sterile hospital room, there was still this like angelic presence, if you will, in every single birth space. And it's hard because I fully agree that hospitals are necessary and needed. I'm so grateful for hospitals in any sort of high-risk situation. Some of my greatest allies work in the hospital. But when I started to transition from being in the hospital setting more in a home birth setting, I saw even more of that magic enter into the room. And though even just the way that we talked to baby at birth. So you'll always hear me catch me saying that the reason I became a midwife first is for baby's experience of birth. Not to say that mom's experience isn't equally as important, but I really, really care how these babies are ushered into the world. So we try to make sure that the lights are low, and most of my clients have water births. So these babies are born from a warm environment into a warm environment. We keep voices low, and we acknowledge baby as if they were a person in the room, obviously because they are. But we know that babies process things about 6 times slower than we do. So we really slow that down, and we let that organic unfolding, if you will, of everything taking place the way that it's supposed to. I recently just posted a video of a baby doing a breast crawl, and most people don't even know that it's possible. But I want you to think of any mammal that gives birth. And think of the little puppies that come out. They like nuzzle their way into mom, and they find the nipple, and they don't need any guidance from us humans. It's designed to work that way. And human babies are the same way. And so if we allow that to happen, then what we see is these really beautiful things that unfold. And so there's this beautiful sacred welcoming committee that comes in with every birth. And I'll have people ask me like, how do you guarantee that you'll be at a birth? And I always respond and say, I can't guarantee that I'll be at a birth. It's very rare that I miss a birth. If I'm committing to be at your birth, I want to be at your birth. But there's a sacred welcoming committee that's already been picked beforehand. And if I get to be part of that sacred welcoming committee, I'm so grateful for it. But whoever's meant to be there will be there.
Lindsey, do all midwives see birth as this kind of sacred special entry for these little beings the way you do?
I'd like to say yes, but unfortunately, I don't think that's the case. There's a couple different avenues of midwifery. So there is nurse midwives who are fantastic and wonderful, but they're trained a lot different than we are. So they're typically trained in a university type of setting, and then most of their apprenticeship is in a hospital-based setting. So they don't get that same experience at home birth unless they go out and seek it. And I know lots of certified nurse midwives that are home birth midwives. The way that I went is a traditional route of midwifery. I attended the first accredited California midwifery school, and all of my apprenticeship and training was done in the home. So obviously, if we had to transfer to a hospital for any reason, that was included as well. But 95% of my births were at home. And so it just kind of brings a little bit different philosophy behind it, where if you're learning in a hospital-based setting, it's a very much like a Western medical-based philosophy, whereas the traditional route is more so of like herbs and homeopathy and the spiritual connections and making sure that the mental space is well tilled. And we go through so many different fears. And then always there's people that marry that in the middle.
Coming up, Lindsey gives us a glimpse of the history of midwifery. She also describes what true medicine is and tells a poignant story of helping a dying father catch his newborn baby in his arms.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Paleo Valley. Paleo Valley offers a variety of meat sticks that include 100% grass-fed beef sticks, pasture-raised turkey sticks, and the new 100% pasture-raised pork. Their meat sticks use organic spices and are preserved using natural fermentation processes rather than preservatives. They are the perfect guilt-free, clean protein snack. Go to paleovalley.com and use the code WISE for 15% off your purchases. That's paleovalley.com and the code word WISE. And a shout out to Optimal Carnivore. They have a new Brain Nourished product that combines grass-fed beef brain and lion's mane mushrooms in a groundbreaking formula. It is the ultimate whole food nootropic to build a better brain. These two ancestral superfoods have been used for centuries to improve brain function and overall mental well-being. And they're now available for the first time together in convenient capsules. Go to amazon.com/optimalcarnivore to check out all of their offerings and use the code WESTON10 to receive 10% off all products. That's amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and the code WESTON10. This is Hilda Labrada-Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. So you were trained traditionally and licensed through a medical board, and now you're a midwife that it sounds like mostly facilitates births in the home. How does that all fit together?
It's really interesting because if we look back at the history of midwifery, that was kind of the basis. It was the center of the community. It was the original family practice doc. The midwives were the herbalists and the therapists and the geriatric caregivers. And we look at right around the late 1400s, and that's when the revolution of Western medicine basically started through the Catholic Church. And the midwives were villainized at that point. And so when we kind of go into how midwives have historically practiced, and then we go into how the medical board dictates how we practice, they're two different things. And so let's just talk about the United States as a whole. Every state has a medical board. There are some states in the United States that midwifery is illegal still. There's some states in the United States that midwifery is illegal, meaning that there's no guidance around what their scope of practice is. And then there's some states where we are licensed and have to follow certain protocols within what the state sets for us. So California and Washington are very similar in the sense. In 2014, what happened is something that's called a sunset review. So they looked over all of what we were allowed to do, and they took away two really big things from us, which was twins and breeches. Like I said earlier, we have to have an OB present. Now, to find an OBGYN that's okay with home birth is like a far stretch. So luckily for me, I have two OBs that I work with that are very open and love home birth. That's all they do is home birth. But it really takes away from the family's right to choose what they want to do with their bodies and their babies. Another thing that they took away from us is that moms can't give birth at home after 42 weeks of gestation. So 40 weeks is the due date. There's a bell curve. The same amount of babies that are born at 38 weeks are born at 42 weeks, but 40 weeks is that halfway point. And if they go late, then it really causes a lot of stress. Financially, they're out of pocket for paying for a home birth that they might not get to experience because of this law, and puts a lot of pressure on these moms. And so it's interesting to navigate through it, especially because I was licensed prior to 2014 as well. So I had to adjust and shift and kind of move my sails a little bit. But what it all boils down to is that even within this restriction, that I try to give that family-centered care with the full autonomy. I trust their bodies above and beyond anything else. They know their bodies above and beyond anything else. I get to be the Sherpa that walks up Mount Everest with them. I've done it. What am I at right now? I think I'm around 1,600 births. But I also get to realize that they know the limits of their body, and we navigate those things together.
Do you feel like in our modern medical kind of scientific or clinical approach to birth, we miss some of what we were talking about at the top, Lindsey, that we miss some of that mystical, transcendent experience and reverence for ushering in a new life?
100%. So what I see happen time and time and time again is that I have women that get to a place in birth, which we call transition, or some of us call it transformation. And it's right at the end of birth, and it's right before she starts to push her baby into this world. And it's the time where all of those endorphins and all of those hormones are literally the highest that they're ever going to be in their life. And they're basically out in space getting their baby from the stars. Like, that's how I describe it. Like, they're not in the room. Like, they're in an actual psychedelic trance experience. And it's scary. Like, they don't know if they can do it, and they don't know if they can push forward. And there's this place where we lock hands and we connect our hearts. And I would whisper into her ear, the only way out is through. And in that moment, what happens is that they realize that there's nothing else outside of them that they need other than going through it. All they need to do is surrender to it. And they come out that other side, basically in ecstatic bliss, right? They've just pushed their baby into their arms. And I can't even tell you how many times it's been said to me that their lives are changed in that moment. In that moment, throughout the rest of their lives, they will always remember that moment where they didn't think what they were doing was possible. They didn't think that they had the physical or emotional space to push through, but they did. And so I always say that's the best way to start motherhood, right? For you to be in this experience where you don't think it's possible, but you do it. I mean, I'm raising teenagers now, right? There's times where I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't do it anymore. But I innately remember that strength that I found within their births. And each person's birth is different. Each baby's birth is different. Might have a mom that's on baby number 5 and you think she's going to birth super fast. And then all of a sudden, like, this 5th baby just takes forever to come and we have to change mom's positions and do all these different things. And you're like, oh, that's what you're going to need to mother this baby in this world. So they all have their own stories. And sometimes we know what it means and sometimes we don't. But there's always this beautiful piece of spirituality that comes with each and every birth.
Well, and honestly, as I listen to your words, I can't help but think this is actually true medicine. This is true medicine, is serving the woman who's delivering. And I was going to say the patient, but she's not a patient. This whole concept that we have that they need to be in the hospital to give birth is something that's been introduced only recently. And in ancient cultures, people gave birth in their home environment, right? So we're kind of coming full circle to that. Tell us what your definition of true medicine is, Lindsey.
So I want to say, like, back to what you just said, that it's just, recently that we came into the hospital. So it's usually about 2 to 3 generations back that we have to look for everybody that was born at home. In 1900, every single baby was born at home. So it's really not that far away. Like, people are like, oh, home birth is a trend. Like, we knew that the statistics from home birth went up 22% from 2019 to 2022, which obviously there's a lot that happened in 2022 and nobody wanted to be in the hospital. But I'm like, no, it's not a trend. Hospital birth is a trend. Hospital birth has been here way shorter than home birth has been. Home birth has always been here. So in terms of what true medicine is to me, I think that it is remembering that the body has the innate ability to heal itself most of the time. Now, again, grateful for Western medicine, grateful for hospitals. If we have a broken bone, great. But I'll tell the story of when I have a mom that has a perineal tear, if she's torn after she's given birth. If the tear is small enough, I will say to her, if I have to stick a needle into your vagina and numb it, give it lidocaine, and then stick another needle that has a foreign stitch, our bodies are like, what is this? I don't need this in my body. The only thing that stitch is doing is holding your body together so it can heal itself. The stitch doesn't have any magical powers in it. There's nothing that the stitch is actually doing other than holding the body together to heal itself. And so I'll always say, like, I have to open this in order to even find your tear. So this tear is going to heal fine because the body's already bringing itself together to heal on its own. So those little reminders. Just yesterday, I had a call from a mom that had a 1-year-old that had a really bad cough, and she had gone to the pediatrician and she felt like she really didn't get a good enough information. And I sent her a voice text. And in the voice text, I do a lot. I reminded her to take a breath. And I reminded her to take a breath down into her knowing that she is the expert of her baby, that she knows her baby better than any pediatrician, better than any midwife, better than anyone else around her. She's been with that baby, essentially probably 24/7 for the last year. And so she knows what's going to heal that baby the best. And so just remembering and reminding them to come back to the stillness of not being in a state of stress, because just lowering those stress hormones alone is going to help the body heal. We know that. That's scientifically proven again and again and again. But then just that remembering that true medicine is that the body is able to heal itself.
Yeah, I love that. And that resonates deeply with me. Now, I want to go back to the top, Lindsey, where you were talking about how birth and death in some ways are inextricably linked. Can you talk to us a little bit about womb to tomb care?
So, like I said earlier, the midwife was the original family practice doctor. So what we would say is that midwives were with families from womb to tomb, meaning that the baby in the womb until the end of life, where, the tomb. You'll also hear it called from cradle to grave. And what that means to me is that original family practice doc knew that family inherently, right? They knew everything about them. They knew the dynamics of their family. They knew how each kid operated within that family system. And they were able to navigate through all of those life transitions with that family. And so while midwifery is not family practice medicine, like we can't go and be the kid's pediatrician and prescribe medication for adolescent kids or anything like that. What I do find is that the relationships that I make with these families, it goes on and on and on. Like it doesn't end. I don't say goodbye at my 6-week appointment, like a standard OB appointment would. I mean, I have people that come in and their kids are, I think my oldest one right now is 19. I still get pictures of that kid. It's so beautiful to watch them grow. And then on the same note, to also watch that mother and father unit evolve with each child and how they parent them.
Wow. So it's something that's kind of foreign to us now because we have a specialty for every age and stage and even parts of the body, right? You've got the gastro guy, and then you've got the ear, nose, and throat guy. And
nobody talks. They don't communicate with each other, right?
No, they're not communicating with each other. And they literally see the person as their issue. So we've got the elbow case in this room and the hernia and A2, right? And so we dehumanize people in a way. And the kind of medicine or care that you're describing is foreign, but I'm glad it's seeing a resurgence. Whether or not people refer to it as a trend or not, to me, seems almost irrelevant.
Yeah. I had the opportunity to work in the emergency room and on an ambulance prior to becoming a midwife. And so my initiation into this was actually with death. And I was with several, I don't know how many, like lots of people as they transitioned. And what I realized is that I would be sitting in the back of an ambulance with this gorgeous 80-year-old woman, and she would start telling me like all of her life secrets, all of her life's joys, because she knew that that was her last chance in order to communicate that. And so I absorbed that in, and I really got to realize that that energy of death is very similar to the energy of birth. One of the greatest gifts that I've ever given my daughter, who was 12 at the time, is when my grandmother died. She was the matriarch of our family. She was 96 years old. She was born and raised on a farm. And we brought her home from the hospital to die at home. Once she had passed, I cleared the room and I kept my daughter in the room. And we anointed her naked 96-year-old body with frankincense, and we washed her body. And when the coroner came to bring a body bag, we were the ones that put her in it and put flowers in it as we zipped her up. And in order for my daughter to experience that at that age, I feel like is one of the most beautiful things that will carry on in throughout her life at so many different stages, knowing that beauty, that peace is something that we don't need to fear.
And you used the word earlier in this conversation, container. Some people say, especially those who have witnessed this transition from life to death, that the container is left behind, the body, that the spirit leaves. And even if you see life and death as merely a pulse and it's a physical thing that we experience, literally something changes when there's no longer life in that body. Have you witnessed that too, Lindsey?
Yeah, I mean, the energy shifts. And it's so interesting because there's this moment that right before birth, right before I know that a baby's going to emerge, I feel it every single time at every single birth that I have to catch myself and remind myself to take a deep breath. And anytime I've witnessed a death, it's the same. It's the same energy that's going to come as they leave. It's the same energy that's going to come as they come in, right? And in that moment, it's like infinite magic that's in the room. It just abounds everywhere. You can feel it. I mean, it's nothing other than holy. Like, that's the only way I can describe it. It's this holy, holy energy. And it's out on so many times. We don't recognize that. A lot of palliative doctors that deal with the end of life, or I call them midwives, they're on the same end of the spectrum, just at the other end, where they're doing death and we're doing birth. And I feel that they get it. They understand that sacredness with birth. And one of my good friends, his name is Dr. Nathan Riley. He is an OBGYN, but he also worked in palliative care. And he's kind of like, we call him the OBGYN midwife now, because he really gets it. He walks into that space and he understands the energy of it, because it's always the same.
Lindsey, I have to tell you that when I was in Ecuador in 2021, I met a curandera and partera, a midwife and a healer, Mamá Rosita Colta, in the small town of Santa Barbara. Anyway, she told me so many times during the interview, which we have on the Spanish podcast, by the way, nuestro cuerpo es sagrado. Our body is holy. She obviously had witnessed so many of these transitions that she completely understood exactly what you're describing, that beautiful, mystical energy that is ushered in and out of this world. And it takes something special to perceive that, I think. I'm really glad that you've brought that to the fore in this conversation. So tell us one more story, Lindsey, before we wrap up, of something you witnessed, a sacred moment like we've been describing. You talked about the twins' birth earlier in this interview. Do you have another story of a life being ushered in or one leaving that is especially poignant?
I'm going to tell the story because one of my good friends that passed, his death anniversary is coming up on Easter, and we're just a few days away from Easter here. And so I feel that it's appropriate to hear the story of his death because it's just as sacred as his wife's birth. I was their midwife for 2 babies. When she came to me with her second pregnancy, her husband wasn't feeling well, and she knew that there was something wrong. He was 32 years old and was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. His name is Stephen, and he will forever live in my heart. The experience of that will forever live in my heart. So we navigated the pregnancy with making sure that she stayed healthy, but we also navigated the pregnancy with making sure that they were taken care of. So within our community, there was almost $100,000 donated, so she didn't have to worry about any financial stress. There was meals constantly dropped off at her door. There was hairdresser clients of mine that were going to their house to cut their family's hair. Like, the community really, really gathered around them. When she went into labor, I ended up taking more care of him than I did of her. So he was in so much pain. I mean, this was a 6'3", 6'4" man that had this big, broad shoulders and this big body. And he was probably down to 140 pounds at that point. And so the pain that he was experiencing was one that I was tending to, as, you know, I had other people there that were obviously helping her, but the main focus was making sure that Stephen was comfortable so he could experience and he could catch his baby. And so Weston was born on September 1st, and he was able to survive. He was able to be there for the first, he's 7 months old when Stephen passed. And he was able to get to know that baby and hold that baby and love that baby along with their toddler. And as we came to the conclusion that his sacred body was no longer going to be strong enough to push through, we were in the hospital setting, and my client, Amanda, my friend Amanda, was nursing her baby, and she was there 24/7 around the clock. She didn't want to leave her husband because we didn't know at any time where he was going to pass. And what we ended up doing is setting up a chain of midwives that would go into the hospital, and they would crawl into the hospital bed with Stephen, and they would run their fingers through his hair and sing to him all night long, where Amanda was able to sleep next to him and nurse their baby all night long. And so that lasted for about 7 days. And on the night that he passed, the Easter Eve, if you will, we knew that he was really close. And there was a bird that kept coming up to the window, and right at sunrise, right, pecking at the window. And we knew in that moment that Stephen was getting ready to leave. So he left his earthly body, his sacred holy vessel, and we were there. Again, I did the same thing with them. We unclothed his body from the hospital clothes, and we anointed him in frankincense, and we washed his body, and we zipped him up in the body bag that was taken away to bring him away, and experiencing 2 births with them, holding Stephen as he caught his baby into his hands, and then holding Stephen as his soul left his body, was one of the most full circle moments I've ever had in my life. And that's true midwifery right there. That's what midwifery is. That's what true medicine is right there. It's that family-centered care. It's that deep reverent respect for that journey.
Well, even just this conversation, I think, has been very moving to me. It's powerful stuff to contemplate the stuff we're made of, and that it's more than what the eyes can perceive. And that as we come and go in our very brief stay on this earth, that there's something sacred about it all. And so thank you for explaining true midwifery to us and for this conversation. I want to pose to you now the question I like to pose at the end. If the listener could just do one thing to improve their health, because a lot of listeners are looking for a healthier, happier lifestyle, what would you recommend that they do, Lindsey?
There's so many different things that I could say, but I find that the most important thing, especially in the climate that we're at right now, where everybody is so divided, is that if we just go outside every single morning and we put our feet in the dirt and we look up at the sun and we look at maybe a little of the stars if we're there at sunrise, and we look and see where we're connected, and we realize that just the power of our voice can ricochet across the entire universe. We know that through quantum physics. And if we realize that the most important thing that we know is that we're connected, then there's no way that there's division anymore. So I think that if we step back into that connectedness, then we'll step into a space where no one's in stress anymore, that we're all in this state of being one. And that will just drastically reduce all of these ailments that we're searching for answers for, and realize that those answers are within ourselves.
Wise words to end on. Thank you so much for this conversation, Lindsey. It's been amazing.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Our guest today was Lindsey Meehleis. Visit her website, lindseymeehleis.com. And that's Lindsey spelled Lindsey, Meehleis, Meehleis.com. And I'm Hilda Labrada Gore, the host and producer of this podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. DD9000 has this to say: can no longer recommend this podcast. Love the work of Dr. Price, but this podcast has strayed into lunacy. Doing an episode on urine therapy is embarrassing and ridiculous. You should be ashamed for promoting such disgusting and unsupported nonsense through Dr. Price's name. Dee, thank you for this review. Honestly, we don't expect every episode to resonate with every individual who's listening. So thank you for telling us what you think. And you too can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Give us as many stars as you like and tell the world if you think the show is worth listening to. And thank you so much, my friend. Stay well and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.